Good afternoon. We will not hurry today because there is nothing here that can be grasped in haste. What is given is not information to be taken hold of, but a recognition that must come quietly, almost unnoticed, as the dawn comes without announcement, without strain. We are not gathered to learn something new in the sense that the world understands learning. We are here, rather, to remember something that has always been present, something that has never been absent from our experience, though often obscured by the activity of thought, by reaction, by judgment, by the constant inner commentary of the human mind. There is a great temptation, whenever we come together in a spiritual capacity, to expect something to happen, to expect a feeling, an experience, a result. But the Master never taught us to look for effects. He taught us to seek first the kingdom of God and to let the rest take care of itself. And so we begin not by seeking forgiveness, not by seeking peace, not by seeking healing, but by seeking that still awareness in which truth is revealed. The psalmist tells us, "Be still and know that I am God." He did not say, "Be active and know," nor be emotional and know, nor even be sincere and know. He said, "Be still." And this stillness is not the absence of sound, nor the absence of movement. It is the absence of resistance. It is the laying down of the human will to manage, to fix, to correct, to judge. Now, something very simple and very easily misunderstood must be faced today. It is not new, it is not advanced, it is not mysterious, yet it is the reason why so many earnest students struggle for years with forgiveness and never quite attain it. They pray for it, they work at it, they talk about it, and yet the burden remains. The reason is this: forgiveness is not something you do. Forgiveness is something that results, and it results only when a certain false activity of consciousness has been relinquished. Jesus never went about forgiving people in the way that modern religion imagines. He did not stand in moral judgment and then magnanimously release it. He did not say, "Yes, you are guilty, but I will forgive you." That was the method of the Pharisee, not the Christ. The Christ said, "Neither do I condemn thee." And in that moment, forgiveness had already taken place, not as an act, but as a fact. We must understand this clearly at the outset, or everything that follows will be misapplied. Forgiveness is not an act of goodness performed by a good person toward a bad one. That concept belongs entirely to the human level of thought. True forgiveness is the disappearance of judgment through the recognition of spiritual identity. The world has trained us to believe that judgment is natural, inevitable, even necessary. We are told that without judgment there can be no justice, no discernment, no morality. But the Christ teaching does not say, "Judge wisely." It says, "Judge not according to the appearance, but judge righteous judgment." And righteous judgment is not judgment at all as the human mind conceives it. It is spiritual discernment, which sees through appearances and therefore has nothing to condemn. Paul tells us, "Henceforth know we no man after the flesh." That single statement, if understood, dissolves the entire struggle around forgiveness. For what is it that we forgive? Is it not always something that has been seen after the flesh, a word spoken, an act committed, a failure displayed? And if we continue to know one another after the flesh, forgiveness will always be an effort and often an impossible one. So we are not here today to make you forgive anyone. God forbid that we should place such a burden upon you. You are not asked to forgive your enemies. You are not asked to forgive your family. you are not even asked to forgive yourself. You are asked only to see truly. And when you see truly, forgiveness takes place without effort, without strain, and without memory. The Master said, "The truth shall make you free." He did not say that effort would make you free, nor discipline, nor struggle. Truth is not applied. Truth is recognized. And the recognition of truth always begins with the gentle surrender of false seeing. Now, let us be very clear. Nothing is being taken away from you today. No human faculty is being denied. You are not being asked to become passive, weak, or indifferent. On the contrary, what is about to be unfolded is the most liberating realization possible, that you do not have to carry the burden of judgment, and therefore you do not have to carry the burden of forgiveness either. We will proceed slowly, because this is holy ground. And like Moses at the burning bush, we remove our shoes, not outwardly, but inwardly, knowing that the place whereon we stand is not a place of human opinion, but of divine revelation. Let us continue. Now we come to the central premise, and it must be stated very plainly, very quietly, and without ornament. Because if it is misunderstood, everything that follows will be distorted. Forgiveness is not an act of will. Forgiveness is not a decision. Forgiveness is not something you do because you are spiritual or because you want to be spiritual. Forgiveness is the natural result of a change in consciousness. As long as forgiveness is attempted as an act, it will remain difficult, and for some, it will remain impossible. The human mind can be trained to be polite, to restrain itself. Forgiveness belongs to the Christ consciousness alone, because only the Christ consciousness sees what needs no forgiveness. We must face this honestly. Many have sat in churches for decades, hearing sermons on forgiveness, repeating prayers for forgiveness, and still carrying grievances so heavy that they color every relationship, every decision, every prayer. And the reason is not lack of sincerity, it is not lack of desire, it is lack of understanding. Jesus did not say, try to forgive. He did not say, work at forgiveness. He said, judge not. And that statement is the key that unlocks the entire subject. Forgiveness is not the cure for judgment. The absence of judgment is the end of the need for forgiveness. Let us look at this carefully. If I judge a man, whether silently or aloud, whether harshly or gently, I have already accepted the appearance presented to me as reality. I have said within myself, this is what you are. And having done that, forgiveness becomes necessary because I have made something real that now must be undone. But if I do not judge, if I refuse to bear witness to appearances as truth, what is there to forgive? Forgiveness does not arise because nothing has been taken in, nothing has been accepted, nothing has been registered as real. The scripture tells us, love thinketh no evil. It does not say that love sees evil and excuses it. It does not say that love sees evil and then overcomes it. It says that love does not think evil. And where evil is not thought, it has no reality, no continuity, no power. Now, this is where the human mind protests. It says, but something did happen. Words were spoken. Actions were taken. Harm was done. And on the human level, that is so, but the Christ teaching does not ask us to live on the human level. It asks us to live from a higher standpoint, where we judge not according to appearances, but according to spiritual truth. Paul tells us, there is therefore now no condemnation to them which are in Christ Jesus. Notice no condemnation, not because sin has been overlooked, but because identity has been understood. Where identity is known as spiritual, condemnation cannot attach itself. This is why forgiveness, when practiced as a human virtue, often feels false. You say the words, "I forgive," but inwardly something resists, something remembers, something reacts. And that reaction is not a failure of character. It is a signal that judgment is still active in consciousness. We must not be afraid to see this. Spiritual progress does not come through pretending. It comes through honest recognition. If you find forgiveness difficult, it is not because you are unloving. It is because you are still judging, and that judgment may be very subtle. It may not sound like condemnation at all. It may sound like understanding, explanation, justification. But if it fixes another in a role, in a past, in a personal history, it is judgment nonetheless. Jesus did not forgive the woman taken in adultery. He did not say, "Yes, you are an adulteress, but I forgive you." He said, "Neither do I condemn thee." And in that moment, the entire structure of accusation collapsed. There was no judge. Therefore, there was no need for forgiveness. So we must stop asking, "How do I forgive?" That is the wrong question. The right question is, what am I still judging? For when judgment ceases, forgiveness is not something you do, it is something that has already happened. This is why the Christ consciousness is effortless. It does not struggle with evil. It does not wrestle with wrong. It does not overcome appearances by force. It simply sees what is real. And in the light of that seeing, the unreal dissolves of its own nothingness. The Master said, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light." Forgiveness, when understood spiritually, is light so light that it often goes unnoticed. There is no drama in it, no announcement, no sense of accomplishment. There is simply peace where there was once reaction. And so we begin to see that forgiveness is not a virtue to be cultivated, but a byproduct of spiritual sight. When the eye is single, the body is full of light. When consciousness is purified of judgment, love stands revealed, and forgiveness is no longer required. Let us go further. Now we come to a point that requires honesty, because spiritual progress is never hindered by weakness, but often by self-deception. Forgiveness fails not occasionally, but habitually for most sincere seekers, and it fails for one simple reason. It is attempted at the wrong level of consciousness. The human mind believes that forgiveness is something added on to an existing judgment. First, the mind says, "This person has wronged me." Then it says, "I should not feel this way." Then it says, "I must forgive." And so forgiveness becomes an overlay placed on top of judgment rather than the dissolution of judgment itself. This is not forgiveness. It is suppression. And suppression always waits for an opportunity to rise again. The Master never taught suppression. He never taught denial in the sense of ignoring what appears. He taught discernment. He taught us to distinguish between what is seen by the senses and what is known by spiritual awareness. And until that distinction is made, forgiveness will always feel like an effort and often like a lie. Jesus said, "Why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye, but considerest not the beam that is in thine own eye?" This has often been interpreted as moral advice, but it is far deeper than that. The beam is not wrongdoing. The beam is false perception. The beam is the belief that appearances are reality, and as long as that beam remains, the mote will seem very real indeed. Forgiveness fails because we forgive persons instead of perceptions. We forgive actions instead of beliefs. We forgive effects instead of causes. And the cause of every need for forgiveness is the acceptance of a false sense of man. Let us be very clear here. You do not struggle to forgive because you are unspiritual. You struggle because you are sincere, and sincerity alone is not enough. Sincerity must be joined to understanding. Paul tells us, I bear them record that they have a zeal of God, but not according to knowledge. Zeal without knowledge exhausts itself. Knowledge without zeal lies dormant. But when zeal and understanding meet, transformation takes place quietly and permanently. Most people try to forgive while still holding the mental image of the offense. They rehearse it. They revisit it. They tell the story again and again, sometimes aloud, sometimes silently. And then they wonder why forgiveness has not taken root. But the mind cannot hold an image and release it at the same time. As long as the image is entertained, the wound is kept open. Jesus never dealt with images. He dealt with identity. He did not see a sick man. He saw the child of God. He did not see a sinner. He saw one who went and sinned no more once the false belief was broken. He did not forgive disease. He denied its authority. He did not forgive sin. He dissolved the sense of separation that produced it. Forgiveness fails because it is attempted, while the belief in two powers is still active. One power to harm and another power to heal. One power to sin and another power to forgive. But the Christ teaching reveals only one power, one presence, one life. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. And where there is one power, there can be no personal offender. This is difficult for the human mind to accept because the human mind lives by personalizing experience. It says, you did this to me. But the Christ consciousness knows that nothing and no one operates outside of consciousness. Therefore, nothing can act upon you independently of the beliefs entertained within consciousness. Now, do not misunderstand this. This is not blame. This is liberation. To say that consciousness is the arena of experience is not to condemn oneself. It is to reclaim dominion. Be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, not by changing people, not by correcting events, but by renewing perception. Forgiveness fails because we ask it to do what only understanding can do. Forgiveness is not the remover of judgment. Understanding is. Forgiveness is not the remover of pain. Truth is. Forgiveness is not the remover of memory. Spiritual vision is. When you see clearly, you do not need to forgive. And when you do not see clearly, forgiveness will be incomplete. That is not a failure. It is a diagnosis. It tells you where the work is, not on the other person, not on the past, but on your own seeing. The scripture tells us, if thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. A divided eye sees good and evil, right and wrong, victim and offender. A single eye sees only what God sees, and God saw that all he had made was very good. So we do not labor at forgiveness. We turn our attention inward and ask not, how can I forgive, but where am I still bearing false witness? And when that question is asked sincerely, without self-condemnation, the answer comes not as words, but as release. Now we are prepared to go deeper, For we must define judgment itself not as the world defines it, but as the Christ reveals it. Now we must be very exact, because if judgment is misunderstood, it will hide itself under many respectable disguises. Judgment, as the Christ teaching uses the term, is not primarily criticism, nor condemnation, nor harsh opinion. These are only its outward forms. Judgment, in its essence, is the acceptance of appearances as reality. This is why even kind people judge. This is why gentle people judge. This is why spiritual people judge. Judgment does not require malice. It requires only belief in what the senses report. The moment you accept a human appearance of sickness, sin, lack, injustice, or personality as the truth of being, you have judged. The scripture does not say, do not criticize. It says, judge not according to the appearance. That is the command. And it is not a moral command, it is a spiritual law. As surely as touching fire produces a burn, judging according to appearance produces bondage, bondage to reaction, to resentment, to fear, and ultimately to the need for forgiveness. Let us be clear. Judgment is not something you do. It is something you accept. It is the silent yes given to what the world presents. And this acceptance often occurs before thought, before words, before emotion. It is the unexamined reflex of the human mind. When you say, even inwardly, this person is selfish, this person is cruel, this person is ignorant, you have not merely formed an opinion, you have fixed an identity. And once identity is fixed, forgiveness becomes necessary, because you have created something real in consciousness that must later be undone. Jesus never fixed identity in that way. He looked at the publican and saw a child of God. He looked at the harlot and saw purity struggling to be expressed. He looked at the thief on the cross and saw spiritual receptivity. And because he saw spiritually, there was nothing to forgive. The world believes that judgment protects us, that without it we would be naive, vulnerable, unsafe. But Christ reveals the opposite. Judgment blinds us. It causes us to react to shadows and to fight illusions. It keeps us bound to the very conditions we wish to escape. Paul tells us, the letter killeth, but the Spirit giveth life. Judgment is the letter. It is the fixed interpretation, the frozen conclusion, the mental label. Spirit is life. It is movement, renewal, unfolding. Where spirit is allowed to operate, judgment dissolves, not by effort, but by irrelevance. Now, judgment is often confused with discernment, but they are not the same. Discernment sees clearly without condemning. Judgment sees personally and then reacts. Discernment says, this appearance has no authority. Judgment says, this appearance has power over me. This is why Jesus could say, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. This was not a plea for pardon. It was a statement of fact. He was not excusing wrongdoing. He was denying its reality as identity. He knew them not after the flesh. Therefore, he was untouched by the appearance presented to him. Judgment always personalizes. It says, you did this to me. But the Christ consciousness knows that nothing operates outside of consciousness. Therefore, it says, this has no place in the truth of being, and that knowing breaks the cycle of reaction. Let us look again at the commandment. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. This is not merely about lying with words. It is about seeing falsely. It is about testifying, even silently, to a version of man that God did not create. Every time you accept a material sense of another limited, flawed, malicious, ignorant, you bear false witness. And every time you bear false witness, you imprison yourself, because you must then live in a world where such witnesses seem real and powerful. Judgment is not removed by effort. It is removed by understanding. When you see that judgment is simply misplaced faith in appearances, you begin to withdraw that faith. And as faith is withdrawn, appearances lose their hold. Jesus said, "Why callest thou me good? There is none good but one, that is, God." He was not denying goodness. He was refusing personal attribution. He would not allow identity to be placed in the human form. And that refusal is the foundation of spiritual freedom. So we begin to see that judgment is not something to be fought, but something to be outgrown. It fades as spiritual perception develops. And as judgment fades, forgiveness ceases to be a task and becomes a non-issue. Where judgment is absent, love is not something you generate, it is what remains. Now we are ready to go further, for we must see why judgment and love cannot occupy the same consciousness even for a moment. Now we come to a point that must be understood, not intellectually, but spiritually. Judgment and love cannot coexist, not because one is better than the other, but because they do not belong to the same level of consciousness. They are not opposites in degree, they are opposites in nature. The human mind believes that it can judge and still love. It says, "I know what you are, and I love you anyway." But this is not love. This is tolerance. It is endurance. It is often kindness mixed with superiority. Divine love knows nothing of this mixture, because divine love does not begin with a verdict. Paul tells us, "Charity suffereth long and is kind, thinketh no evil." Notice again, thinketh no evil. Love does not see evil and then rise above it. Love does not see wrong and then forgive it. Love simply does not accept evil as identity. And because it does not accept it, there is nothing to overcome, nothing to release, nothing to repair. Judgment fixes, love frees. Judgment says, "This is what you are." Love says nothing at all. It beholds what God is being and rests there. Where judgment is active, consciousness is occupied with appearances. Where love is present, appearances fall away of themselves. Jesus did not alternate between judgment and love. He did not judge first and love later. He loved, and therefore he did not judge. And because he did not judge, his love healed, reformed, restored, without effort, without struggle, without moral pressure. The world teaches that judgment is necessary to protect goodness. Christ teaches that judgment obscures goodness. Judge not, that ye be not judged. This is not a threat, it is a law. The consciousness that judges lives in a judged universe. The consciousness that loves lives in a universe where condemnation cannot enter. Now let us see this very clearly. The moment you judge, even silently, you separate yourself. You stand over against another as observer, evaluator, accuser, or even corrector. And in that separation, love is no longer flowing. It has been replaced by position. Love is not a position. Love is a state of being. God is love, and he that dwelleth in love dwelleth in God, and God in him. You cannot dwell in God and stand outside another at the same time. You cannot abide in love and hold another in a mental category. Judgment is always personal. It deals with persons, histories, actions, motives. Love is impersonal. It sees being, not behavior. It beholds essence, not expression. And because it does not react. This is why forgiveness becomes unnecessary in love. Forgiveness presupposes that something real has occurred that now requires removal. Love never makes that presupposition. Love does not deny appearances. It simply does not grant them authority. Consider how often we say, I love you, but, and everything after the but is judgment. Divine love has no but. It does not qualify itself. It does not justify itself. It simply is. John tells us, there is no fear in love, but perfect love casteth out fear. Judgment and fear are always companions. Where you judge, you fear of being wronged again, fear of being taken advantage of, fear of loss, fear of repetition. Love casts out fear because it has never accepted the premise that there is something to fear. Now, do not misunderstand this. Love does not make you blind. Love does not make you foolish. Love does not expose you to harm. Love removes the false sense of vulnerability that judgment creates. When you stop seeing others as powers over you, either for good or for evil, you stand free. Jesus could walk among sinners and not be defiled. Why? Because he did not see sin as power. He did not react to it. He did not resist it. He simply knew the truth of being, and the truth dissolved the lie. This is why judgment must be relinquished before forgiveness can be real. As long as judgment remains, forgiveness will be temporary. It will need to be renewed, reinforced, defended. But when judgment falls away, forgiveness is not something you return to. It has already done its work. So we are not being asked to love more. We are being asked to judge less. And not through discipline, but through understanding. When you see that judgment and love cannot occupy the same consciousness, you stop trying to combine them. The Master said, no man can serve two masters. You cannot serve the master of appearances and the master of truth at the same time. You cannot see through the senses and through spirit simultaneously. One must yield. And when judgment yields, love does not have to be invited. It is already there. Now we are ready to face the next subtle trap, the belief that forgiveness is a moral obligation rather than a spiritual realization. Now we must touch a point where many sincere students unknowingly turn away from the very freedom they seek. It is the moment forgiveness is turned into a moral obligation. The moment you say, I ought to forgive, you have already left the Christ standpoint and returned to the human sense of good and evil. The human mind lives by obligation. It says, this is right, that is wrong, this should be done, that should not. And within that framework, forgiveness becomes a duty, a spiritual requirement imposed upon the will. But Christ never imposed forgiveness as a duty. He revealed forgiveness as a consequence of spiritual sight. Jesus did not say, you must forgive because it is the right thing to do. He said, if ye forgive men their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. This has often been misunderstood as a bargain or even a threat, but it is neither. It is a statement of law. It is saying, in effect, that the consciousness which forgives is the consciousness which has already let go of judgment and therefore lives in a state of freedom. The moment forgiveness becomes an obligation, it produces strain. And wherever there is strain, there is ego. The ego tries to be good. The ego tries to be spiritual. The ego tries to forgive. But the ego cannot forgive because the ego lives by comparison, by memory, by self-justification. It keeps score. And forgiveness that keeps score is not forgiveness at all. Paul warns us of this when he says, having begun in the Spirit, are ye now made perfect by the flesh? Forgiveness that begins as spiritual insight and then is maintained by human effort will always collapse under pressure. It will fail when the wound is deep, when the offense repeats, when the memory is strong. Many people carry guilt because they believe they should have forgiven long ago. They say, I know better. I've heard the teachings. I've prayed. Why am I still hurt? And this guilt adds a second burden on top of the first. Now there is not only resentment, but self-condemnation. This is not the Christ way. The Christ never condemns, not others and not you. There is therefore now no condemnation. None. Not for failing to forgive, not for feeling hurt, not for reacting. Condemnation belongs to the same false system as judgment. Forgiveness, when it is real, does not feel virtuous. It does not feel like accomplishment. It often feels like nothing at all, simply the absence of tension where tension once was. There is no sense of I have forgiven. There is only quiet. The Master said, when ye shall have done all those things which are commanded you, say, we are unprofitable servants. True spiritual action does not produce pride. It produces transparency. Forgiveness that produces a sense of moral superiority has not yet reached the spiritual level. Now let us be very clear. There is no failure in discovering that you have not forgiven. That discovery is grace. It shows you exactly where consciousness is still accepting appearances as real. And once seen, that acceptance can be gently withdrawn, not by force, not by pressure, but by understanding. God does not ask you to forgive what you cannot forgive. God asks you to see what you have been seeing falsely. And when that false seeing is relinquished, forgiveness follows of its own accord. The prophet Micah tells us, what doth the Lord require of thee but to do justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with thy God? Notice walk humbly. Humility does not demand of itself. Humility listens. Humility waits. Humility allows truth to do the work. Forgiveness that comes through humility is effortless because it is not personal. It is not I forgiving you. It is the recognition that there is nothing personal here to forgive. There is only God appearing, sometimes distorted by belief, but never altered in essence. When you release the idea that forgiveness is something you owe the world, you open the door for forgiveness to arise naturally within you. And when it arises naturally, it does not need to be maintained. It abides. So we lay down the burden of obligation. We stop telling ourselves what we should feel. We stop measuring our spirituality by our reactions. We rest instead in the understanding that truth, once seen, governs itself. And now, having removed the false weight of moral effort, we are ready to turn to the Master's own teaching not as doctrine, but as living consciousness. Now we turn directly to the teaching of the Master, not as theology, not as doctrine, and not as moral instruction, but as revelation of consciousness. For Jesus did not come to tell us how to behave better humanly. He came to show us how to live spiritually. And unless his words are understood as states of consciousness, they will forever remain ideals rather than demonstrations. When Jesus said, judge not, he was not giving advice for social harmony. He was unveiling a law of being. He was saying, in effect, that judgment binds consciousness to appearances, and that liberation lies in seeing beyond them. Judgment to the Christ was not merely wrong, it was unreal, because it was based on what God did not create. We must remember that Jesus never reacted to sin, disease, hatred, or injustice in the way the human mind expects. He did not fight them. He did not resist them. He did not even focus on them. He withdrew his attention from them entirely and placed it on what is, and that withdrawal of attention was the act that healed. When the woman was brought before him, accused and condemned, the record tells us that Jesus stooped down and wrote on the ground. Spiritually understood, this is not a dramatic pause. It is a withdrawal from the level of accusation. He would not participate in the collective judgment. He would not accept the mental atmosphere being offered to him. And then he said, "He that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone." This was not a challenge. It was a revelation. In the presence of Christ consciousness, judgment cannot sustain itself. Stones fall away because the basis for throwing them disappears. Jesus did not say, "You are forgiven." He said, "Go and sin no more." Why? Because once the false sense of identity was dissolved, there was nothing left to continue. Sin does not repeat itself when it is not believed in as identity. Disease does not persist when it is not believed in as law. Guilt does not linger when it is not believed in as truth. The Christ consciousness does not forgive effects. It dissolves causes. And the cause of every discord is a false sense of separation from God. When that sense is removed, the discord vanishes, not always dramatically, but always lawfully. Jesus said, "I can of mine own self do nothing." This is not humility in the human sense. It is clarity. It is the recognition that the personal sense has no power, neither to harm nor to heal. All power belongs to God, and God operates as consciousness, not as intervention. This is why Jesus could love his enemies, not because he was morally superior, but because he did not see enemies. He saw ignorance, blindness, belief, not persons acting independently of God. And therefore he was not offended, not threatened, not wounded. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." This is not forgiveness requested. It is ignorance exposed. Where ignorance is seen, condemnation has no place. You do not condemn a blind man for stumbling. You do not condemn a child for misunderstanding. And Christ never condemned humanity for acting from a false sense of life. The world has tried to imitate Christ by copying his actions. But Christ is not imitated. Christ is realized. You cannot practice Christ consciousness from the outside. You must yield to it from within. And the yielding begins with the relinquishment of judgment. Paul understood this when he said, "Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus." He did not say, "Let this behavior be in you." He said, "Let this mind be in you." Forgiveness is not behavior, it is mind, it is consciousness. And so we see that the Master did not forgive because he was loving. He loved because he saw truly. And because he saw truly, forgiveness was never required. When you begin to read the Gospels from this standpoint, everything changes. You stop asking, "How can I do what Jesus did?" and begin asking, "How did Jesus see?" And that question, sincerely asked, opens the door to the same consciousness operating in you. Jesus said, "The works that I do shall ye do also, not by effort, not by imitation, but by consciousness, by seeing as he saw, by knowing as he knew, by resting where he rested in the awareness of God as the only reality. And now, having reframed Christ's teaching as consciousness rather than conduct, we are ready to look at the practical inner work that makes this seeing possible. For there is preparation required, not preparation of the world, but preparation of consciousness. Now we come to the part of the teaching that is often overlooked, and yet without it, nothing that has been said can be lived. There is real inner work to be done, but it is not the work of fixing, correcting, or disciplining the human self. It is the work of purification of consciousness. Joel did not use the word purification in a moral sense. He did not mean cleansing sin, or erasing mistakes, or improving character. Purification means clearing consciousness of false beliefs, especially the belief that appearances are reality and that persons have power. Jesus never began his prayer with requests. He began with recognition. Our Father, which art in heaven. Before there is healing, before there is forgiveness, before there is peace, there must be a turning inward to recognize the nature of reality. And that recognition cannot take place in a consciousness cluttered with judgments, reactions, and mental noise. This is why Joel insisted that we prepare ourselves before prayer not by reciting words, but by examining consciousness, not to condemn ourselves, but to become aware of what we are accepting as true. Let a man examine himself. Paul tells us not to accuse, but to discern. Now, what is it that must be purified? It is not emotion. Emotion is an effect. It is not memory. Memory is a record. It is not personality. Personality is a surface appearance. What must be purified is the habit of accepting appearances as law. Every resentment you carry, every grievance you revisit, every reaction that repeats itself is a sign not of failure but of belief. It tells you exactly where consciousness is still granting authority to the visible world. And once that is seen, it can be released. Purification is not forceful. It is gentle. It begins with the willingness to say, I may be seeing this wrongly. That single admission opens the door to grace. The human mind insists on being right. The spiritual mind is content to see truly. Jesus said, if thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. The eye is consciousness. A divided eye sees good and evil, victim and offender, right and wrong. A single eye sees God appearing in nothing else. Purification is the movement from divided seeing to single seeing. Now, let us be very clear. Purification does not mean denying that something appears to have happened. It means denying that what appears has authority, permanence, or identity. It means refusing to take the appearance into consciousness as truth. Joel often said, do not try to get rid of error. Just stop believing it. Error has no life of its own. It lives only in the attention given to it. When attention is withdrawn, error fades, not because it has been defeated, but because it was never real. This is why purification always precedes forgiveness. You cannot forgive what you are still believing in. As long as you believe that a person has harmed you, forgiveness will be partial. But when you see that what appeared as harm had no power to define reality, forgiveness is no longer needed. It has already occurred. The psalmist prayed, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. A clean heart is not a heart without feelings. It is a heart without false witness. A right spirit is not enthusiasm. It is alignment with truth. Purification, then, is the quiet practice of noticing what you are entertaining in consciousness and letting it go. Not arguing with it, not wrestling it, simply letting it fall away as unreal. This is why silence is so important. In silence, the mental commentary loses momentum. The images fade. The stories soften. And in that quiet, truth makes itself known, not as thought, but as peace. Joel often reminded us that spiritual work is done before we address any problem. If you enter prayer carrying judgment, prayer becomes a request to fix what you have already declared real. But if you enter prayer having purified consciousness, prayer becomes recognition, and recognition is power. So the real work is this. Before you seek to forgive, before you seek to heal, before you seek to change anything, you withdraw from the mental atmosphere of judgment. You say inwardly, I will not take this appearance into consciousness. And you rest. This resting is not passivity. It is trust. In quietness and in confidence shall be your strength. Strength is not in reaction. Strength is not in explanation. Strength is in stillness. And now, having understood the need for purification, we are ready to look at the practical inner act that follows naturally from it, the withdrawal of judgment itself. Now we come to something that must be lived and not merely understood. It is one thing to agree that judgment has no place in spiritual consciousness. It is another thing to withdraw it in the moment it arises. And yet this is the very hinge upon which freedom turns. Judgment is not an action. It is an acceptance. It is the silent agreement that appearances are true, that persons are causes, that circumstances have power. And because it is an acceptance, it can be withdrawn not by effort, but by awareness. Jesus did not say, judge less. He said, judge not. Not because judgment is immoral, but because it is unreal. Judgment assumes a power apart from God. It assumes a self apart from God. And therefore, it cannot coexist with truth. Now, let us be honest. Judgment will appear. It will arise automatically from habit. The human mind has been trained to classify, assess, protect, and condemn. This does not mean you have failed spiritually. It simply means you have noticed the operation of the carnal mind. Paul tells us plainly, the carnal mind is enmity against God. He does not say it is sinful. He says it is opposed. Why? Because it believes in two powers, good and evil, right and wrong, victim and offender. And spiritual consciousness knows only one power. So, what is the practice? The practice is not suppression. Suppression only drives judgment underground, where it becomes more subtle and more dangerous. The practice is recognition and withdrawal. When judgment arises, whether against another, against yourself, or against the world, you do not follow it. You do not analyze it. You do not justify it. You simply say inwardly, this is not truth, and you let it pass. Joel often emphasized that spiritual work is not done on thoughts, but before thoughts. When a judgment appears, it is already too late to fight it, but it is never too late to stop believing it. You see, judgment only has power if you consent to it. The moment you withdraw consent, it collapses. It cannot sustain itself. It has no law, no life, no continuity of its own. Jesus demonstrated this perfectly when the woman taken in adultery was brought before him. He did not argue with the Pharisees. He did not defend the woman. He did not reinterpret the law. He simply refused to participate in the judgment. He that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone. And then silence. Silence is always the end of judgment, because silence returns consciousness to truth. Now, here is where the practice becomes very practical. Suppose someone speaks harshly to you. Immediately, judgment arises. They are wrong. They are unkind. They are unjust. At that moment, you have a choice. You may accept that judgment, or you may withdraw. To withdraw does not mean to approve of behavior. It means to refuse to grant it identity, power, or permanence. It means to recognize that what you are seeing is not the truth of being, but the surface activity of the carnal mind. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. This was not a moral statement. It was a statement of fact. The carnal mind does not know truth. It cannot act from truth, and therefore it cannot define reality. When you withdraw judgment, you are not excusing error, you are dissolving it. Error thrives on resistance. It feeds on reaction. It multiplies when it is opposed, but it disappears when it is seen as nothing. This is why Joel taught that we must never try to correct another person mentally. The moment you attempt to fix someone, you have already judged them. And judgment, no matter how loving it appears, separates. The correct practice is to stand silently in the awareness of truth, to know without words, this person is not the appearance before me. This person is the expression of God, even if that expression is momentarily obscured. And now we come to the most difficult application of this principle, withdrawing judgment from oneself. Many students believe they have released judgment of others while constantly condemning themselves. But self-judgment is no more spiritual than judging another. It is the same belief in separation, merely turned inward. Paul says, "There is therefore now no condemnation to them which are in Christ Jesus." Condemnation does not originate in God. It originates in the belief that you are a personal self trying to become spiritual. But you are not becoming spiritual. You are discovering what already is. And discovery requires openness, not criticism. So when you notice failure, weakness, or fear in yourself, do not judge it. Do not label it. Simply recognize it as belief and withdraw belief. Say quietly, "This is not my being," and rest. Judgment dissolves in the presence of rest. Effort sustains it. Struggle feeds it. But rest returns consciousness to God. Be still and know that I am God. This is not poetry. It is instruction. Stillness is the absence of judgment. Knowing is the recognition of truth. As you practice withdrawing judgment, you will notice something remarkable. Peace will arise without cause. You will not feel justified or victorious or superior. You will feel quiet. And that quiet is the presence of Christ. And now, having learned how judgment is withdrawn, we are prepared for the next unfolding, the natural result of this practice, which is the state Joel called non-reaction, or spiritual neutrality. Now we arrive at something that, to the human mind, appears almost impossible, and yet to spiritual consciousness is entirely natural. We come to the state of non-reaction, the Christly neutrality, that is not indifference, not coldness, not withdrawal from life, but complete freedom from the tyranny of appearances. Reaction is the automatic movement of consciousness toward what it believes has power. We react to criticism because we believe criticism can harm. We react to praise because we believe praise can enhance. We react to danger because we believe danger exists outside of God. Reaction is always a confession of belief. Jesus did not react. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of his life. It is often mistaken for passivity, but it was nothing of the kind. It was authority. Authority does not react. It knows. When accused, he was silent. When threatened, he was composed. When crucified, he forgave. And this was not because he had trained himself to behave well, but because his consciousness was not accepting the reality of what appeared before the senses. The prince of this world cometh, he said, and hath nothing in me. That is the secret. Reaction occurs only when something in the world finds agreement in consciousness. When there is no agreement, there is no reaction. Now let us understand clearly what non-reaction is not. It is not the suppression of emotion. Suppression is reaction delayed. It is not pretending not to feel. It is not withdrawing love. It is not tolerating injustice. It is none of these things. Non-reaction is the state in which consciousness rests in truth so fully that appearances cannot disturb it. It is the stillness of one who knows. This is not the reality of being. Joel taught that reaction is always personal. It arises from the belief that this is happening to me. But Christ's consciousness knows no personal self. It knows only being, and being is untouched. I am not of this world, Jesus said, not meaning he lived elsewhere, but that his consciousness was not subject to the world of appearances. He walked in it, but he did not live from it. Now, this neutrality does not mean you become inactive. On the contrary, it is the only state from which right action can occur. As long as you are reacting, you are acting from fear, defense, or desire. But when reaction ceases, action becomes spontaneous, appropriate, and divinely directed. Consider the still waters spoken of in the psalm. He leadeth me beside the still waters. Still waters reflect clearly. Turbulent waters distort. A reactive mind cannot reflect truth. A still mind reflects God. This is why Joel emphasized meditation not as a technique, but as a way of returning to stillness. In meditation, you are not trying to think spiritually. You are allowing thought to subside so that truth may reveal itself. Non-reaction is not achieved by effort. Effort creates tension, and tension sustains reaction. Non-reaction arises naturally when judgment has been withdrawn and consciousness has been purified. You will notice, as this state deepens, that situations which once provoked immediate response now pass quietly through awareness. You hear words, but they do not penetrate. You see events, but they do not disturb. And you will wonder, why am I at peace? The answer is simple. There is nothing in you responding to illusion. Paul describes this state when he says, I have learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content. Contentment is not satisfaction with circumstances, it is independence from them. This neutrality is the foundation of healing work. You cannot heal what you are reacting to. Reaction binds you to the appearance, but neutrality dissolves it. When you no longer fear disease, disease loses its claim. When you no longer fear lack, lack loses its voice. When you no longer fear people, people lose their power. Resist not evil, Jesus said, not because evil is strong, but because resistance gives it reality. Non-reaction is the highest form of resistance because it denies reality altogether. Now, do not expect this state to appear permanently at once. It unfolds gradually as consciousness learns to rest. Each time you notice reaction and withdraw from it, you weaken the habit of belief. Each time you rest in stillness, truth establishes itself more deeply. And now, having come to this place of neutrality, we are ready to touch the heart of Joel's teaching, the living experience of the one power in which fear dissolves completely. Now we touch the very center of this teaching, the point at which all fear dissolves, not through courage, not through discipline, not through positive thinking, but through revelation. Fear ends when the belief in two powers ends. All fear, without exception, rests upon the assumption that there is something outside of God that can act, influence, destroy, deprive, or oppose. Fear is never about what is seen. It is about what is believed. And the belief is always the same. There is a power other than God. Joel was uncompromising here. He did not say that God is the greatest power. He did not say God is stronger than evil. He said there is only one power, and that one power is God, infinite spirit. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord, not two, not divided, not alternating between good and evil. One, and if God is one, then there is no opposing force, not in disease, not in sin, not in circumstance, not in person, not in death. The moment you accept two powers, fear becomes logical. You must then protect yourself, defend yourself, prepare yourself, and react. But the moment you recognize one power, fear becomes impossible. There is nothing left to fear. Jesus never prepared defenses. He did not seek protection. He did not ask God to shield him from danger. Why? Because he did not believe danger existed. Thinkest thou that I cannot now pray to my Father, and he shall presently give me more than 12 legions of angels? And then he adds, no defense is needed. Fear always seeks a solution in the future. Truth is always present. I am, not I will be, not I was, I am. Presence leaves no room for threat. Now let us be honest again. Fear will arise. It arises as sensation, as thought, as image. And when it does, you are not to fight it. Fighting fear assumes fear has power. You are to recognize it as belief and withdraw belief. Joel taught that fear is not overcome by courage, but by understanding. Courage still accepts danger. Understanding dissolves it. When fear arises, ask yourself, not verbally, but inwardly, what power am I granting here? And the answer will always be a power apart from God. And then you let that belief go. Paul tells us, God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. Fear does not come from God. Therefore, it has no source. And that which has no source has no reality. A sound mind is not a calm personality. It is a consciousness aligned with truth. It is a mind that knows only one cause, one presence, one power. This is why Joel insisted that spiritual healing does not require effort, force, or struggle. Healing occurs when fear has been removed, not because something has been fixed, but because nothing was ever broken. Disease is fear objectified. Lack is fear objectified. Conflict is fear objectified. Remove the belief, and the appearance must dissolve. Now you may ask, what about the evidence of the senses? The senses have always testified to two powers. They testified that the sun revolved around the earth. They testified that the world was flat. They testify now to danger, disease, and death. But spiritual truth is never determined by the senses. We walk by faith, not by sight. Faith is not belief without evidence. Faith is recognition beyond appearances. It is knowing what is true even when it is not yet visible. When you rest in the truth of one power, something extraordinary happens. You do not become reckless. You do not become careless. You become guided. Fear no longer motivates action. Spirit does. And now, fear having lost its foundation, forgiveness becomes effortless. You are no longer forgiving to be virtuous. You are forgiving because there is nothing to forgive. There is no offender, no victim, no power acting apart from God. This brings us naturally to the next unfolding. Forgiveness not as an act, but as a state of spiritual vision. Now we come to a point that radically alters the meaning of forgiveness altogether. Forgiveness, as it is commonly practiced, is an act performed by one person toward another. It presumes an offender, a victim, and a wrong that must be overcome. But spiritual forgiveness is not an act at all. It is vision. Jesus did not forgive by effort. He forgave by seeing. And what he saw was not the sinner, not the offense, not the harm, but the unreality of the appearance in the light of God. They know not what they do. That statement dissolves the entire structure of blame. Forgiveness in this teaching is not something you do after you have been hurt. It is something that occurs the moment you no longer accept hurt as reality. It is the recognition that what appeared as offense never touched truth. Joel was very clear on this point. He taught that forgiveness is automatic when consciousness is aligned with truth. You do not forgive to become spiritual. You forgive because you are seeing spiritually. As long as you believe that a person has power to injure you emotionally, physically, financially, you will struggle with forgiveness. But the moment you see that all power is God, forgiveness becomes effortless. There is no longer anyone to forgive and nothing to forgive them for. Love your enemies, Jesus said, not because enemies deserve love, but because enemies do not exist in truth. Love is the natural state of vision when separation is not believed. Now, this does not mean that appearances vanish instantly. The human scene may continue to display conflict, injustice, misunderstanding, but these appearances are no longer taken into consciousness as reality. They are seen as surface phenomena, waves on the ocean, not the ocean itself. Forgiveness as vision means this: when you look upon another, you are not looking at their history, their actions, or their personality. You are looking at being. You are looking at God expressing itself, even if that expression is momentarily distorted in appearance. Paul expresses this when he says, "Henceforth know we no man after the flesh." The flesh is appearance. Spirit is reality. Forgiveness is simply the refusal to know another after appearance. This is why Joel warned against trying to forgive while still rehearsing the offense. As long as you are remembering what happened, analyzing it, justifying your feelings, forgiveness has not yet occurred. True forgiveness leaves no residue. It leaves no story. The human mind wants closure. Spirit offers release. Closure still remembers. Release forgets. Their sins and iniquities will I remember no more. This is not selective memory, it is spiritual perception. Now notice this carefully. Forgiveness does not require reconciliation. Reconciliation belongs to the human scene. Forgiveness belongs to consciousness. You may never speak to a person again and yet be completely free of them. Freedom is the measure of forgiveness. Forgiveness as vision also applies to nations, groups, histories, and even to oneself. You cannot carry the past into the present and live spiritually. The past exists only as thought, and thought has no power unless you grant it power. Joel often said that memory is one of the last beliefs to dissolve, but dissolve it must, because spirit knows no past. Now are we the sons of God. Now, not after healing, not after forgiveness, not after improvement. Now, when you forgive yourself spiritually, you are not excusing mistakes. You are recognizing that mistakes do not define being. You are releasing the belief that your identity is personal history. This vision does not come through willpower. It comes through stillness. In stillness, the false images fade, and what remains is truth. You do not create forgiveness. You discover it. And as this vision deepens, something else occurs. Compassion arises. Not emotional compassion, but spiritual compassion. You no longer pity, fix, or judge. You simply know. Which brings us now to the natural outcome of forgiveness as vision, the quiet authority of compassion that heals without effort. Now we come to compassion, but not the human emotion that sympathizes with suffering. We come to spiritual compassion, which sees through suffering. Pity looks at a person and agrees that something is wrong. Compassion looks at a person and knows that nothing has ever been wrong with their being. Jesus never pitied. Pity would have confirmed the reality of disease, sin, or lack. Instead, he stood in compassion, which is understanding. Understanding does not react. Understanding does not grieve. Understanding knows. When he saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion. Why? Because they fainted and were scattered abroad as sheep having no shepherd. They did not lack health or supply. They lacked awareness. Compassion responds not to condition, but to ignorance of truth. This is why Joel taught that the healer must never accept the picture presented by the patient. The moment you accept the picture, you have lost your healing capacity. Healing does not occur by addressing conditions. It occurs by abiding in truth. Compassion is the ability to remain anchored in truth while appearances plead for recognition. It is the ability to stand still while the human mind demands action. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. Salvation is not produced, it is revealed. When someone comes to you in pain, physical, emotional, or financial, the temptation is to feel with them. But feeling with them often means descending into their belief. True compassion remains above belief, not out of superiority, but out of fidelity to truth. Joel reminded us again and again, you cannot heal what you fear, and you cannot heal what you pity. Fear and pity are both acknowledgments of power in appearances. Compassion alone sees God where the world sees trouble. This compassion is not dramatic. It is quiet. It does not rush to speak. It does not offer explanations. It rests. And in that rest, something happens not because you do anything, but because truth is present. Where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there am I in the midst of them. The name of God is not a word, it is nature. To gather in God's name is to gather in truth. And truth heals because it is real. Now this brings us to a critical realization. The healer does not heal. The practitioner does not act. The truth reveals itself when consciousness is prepared. This is why Joel insisted that healing work is contemplation, not projection. You are not sending thoughts. You are not directing energy. You are not influencing another mind. You are quietly knowing what is true and allowing truth to do what truth does. And when this compassion becomes stable, fear disappears entirely, not only fear for yourself, but fear for the world. Now we come to the practical outworking of all that has been said. What does it mean to live in this world, its noise, its conflict, its uncertainty, without fear? It means you no longer locate your life in form. You no longer believe your safety resides in systems, structures, governments, bodies, or circumstances. You recognize, as Jesus did, my life is hid with Christ in God. Fear of the world arises only when we believe the world has power. But if God is omnipresent, where can danger be? If God is omnipotent, what can oppose? If God is omniscient, what can surprise? God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Not a future help, not an occasional help, present, always present, and presence leaves no room for threat. Joel often said that spiritual students must come to the place where headlines do not govern consciousness. You may read the news, but you do not absorb it. You do not live from it. You live from truth. The world will always present reasons for fear. There will always be wars, rumors of wars, diseases, economic fluctuations. Jesus told us this plainly. But he also said, be not troubled. Why? Because these things belong to the world of belief, not to reality. When fear arises about the future, recognize that the future does not exist. God is not in tomorrow. God is now. Now is the accepted time. Now is the day of salvation. Living without fear does not mean withdrawing from life. It means engaging life from a different center. You act, speak, and move, but you are not driven. You are led. And when you are led, you find that what is necessary appears without struggle. Supply arrives without anxiety. Protection operates without defense. Guidance unfolds without planning. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Added, not chased, not earned, not forced, added. Now let us end where Joel always ended, not with technique, not with discipline, but with abiding. Spiritual life is not something you practice occasionally. It is not something you turn on when there is a problem. It is a way of living a continuous resting in truth. Jesus did not move in and out of consciousness. He abided, abide in me and I in you. Abiding is not effort, it is staying. You will find that this message does not work when used as a tool. It works only when lived as truth. If you attempt to apply it to fix a problem, you have already stepped out of it. But if you live in it, problems dissolve without being addressed. Joel warned us that many would hear these words and receive nothing but words. Why? Because the message must be internalized. It must become consciousness. This is not accomplished in a day. It unfolds gently, quietly, naturally. Each time you withdraw judgment, each time you release reaction, each time you rest in stillness, consciousness deepens. And one day, not dramatically, not suddenly, you will realize that you are no longer afraid of people, conditions, or outcomes. You will realize that peace has become natural, and you will know that this peace is not yours, it is God's. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give unto you. Not as the world giveth, give I unto you. That peace is the evidence that consciousness has shifted. There is nothing more to do. There is only more to be. Be therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. Not by striving, but by recognizing that perfection has always been present. And so we end where we began, in stillness.